What's the difference between Scotch, whiskey, and bourbon? This might be common knowledge for some, but honestly, it's worth a refresher before you go out and buy a bottle. Let's start with the basics. If you want to learn more about whiskey and discover new favorites, make sure to subscribe for more whiskey insights. So, what makes a whiskey bourbon? The quick answer is the law. Making bourbon is an exceedingly technical exercise, and, it requires that the whiskey meet rigid criteria. The federal standard of identity for bourbon actually stipulates what is and what isn't bourbon. For a whiskey to call itself bourbon, its mash, the mixture of grains from which the product is distilled, must contain at least 51% corn. The rest of the mash is usually filled out with malted barley and either rye or wheat. Then, the mash must be distilled at 160 proof or less, and put into the barrel at 125 proof or less. It also can't contain any additives. The distillate needs to be aged in a new charred oak barrel. If you distill a whiskey in your kitchen that meets all of these standards, congrats, you've made bourbon. Also, you've broken the law. The ATF will be on its way shortly. So, what's the difference between Scotch and whiskey? Well, the main difference between Scotch and whiskey is geographic, but, it also involves ingredients and even the way the words are spelled. Scotch is whiskey, with no E, made in Scotland, while bourbon is whiskey made in the United States, generally in Kentucky. Scotch is made mostly from malted barley, while bourbon is distilled from corn. If you're in England and ask for a whiskey, you'll get Scotch. But in Ireland, you'll get Irish whiskey. And, yep, they spell it differently. So, is Tennessee whiskey bourbon? Well, yes and no. The difference between Tennessee whiskey, like Jack Daniel's, and bourbon, is that after the spirit is distilled, Tennessee whiskey is filtered through sugar maple charcoal. This filtering, which is known as the Lincoln County process, is what really distinguishes Tennessee whiskey from your average bourbon, like Jim Beam. The name Bourbon actually comes from an area known as Old Bourbon, around what is now Bourbon County, Kentucky. On top of these types of whiskey, we also have rye whiskey, which can refer either to American rye whiskey, which must be distilled from at least 51% rye, or Canadian whiskey, which may or may not actually include any rye in its production process.